Before we get into unraveling childhood trauma, I want to make a distinction between childhood and being a young adult. And so there is this time when we get into college here in the United States after the age of 18 that we experience a significant amount of trauma. And we may be searching for our identity, searching for a lot of things that we cannot find at the time or feel that it's impossible to find. But what we're talking about right now is childhood, trauma that happened in your childhood. And the definition, just so we can get a running definition, because you may have a different definition than what we have here. And I'm going to give some Google just blanket responses, unravel those. But the first thing we're going to start with is from a clinic in Arizona. Childhood trauma is when children experience traumatic events. Their developing brain undergoes significant changes. Their stress response becomes hypersensitive, which can lead to an exaggerated and prolonged release of stress hormones like cortisol. This change disrupts the brain's balance. It also hinders the development of brain areas responsible for emotions, memory, and decision making. The psyche is also affected. Individuals who experience early life distress often live with intense feelings of fear, anxiety, and hypervigilance. They are always on the lookout for potential threats. They also often see the world in a distorted way, making it hard to trust others and feel safe in relationships. These thoughts and feelings can cause low self-esteem and a sense of worthlessness. Now, we're going to get to all of that. I think that's an amazing definition, and that's why I wrote it down. But the big part is it creates a highway, I would say a fast track to respond to things that happened in your childhood. It may not be happening now, but you still created the highway system or the racetrack, and then you can serve the response to whatever you think that is. So it's creating a neural pathway for you to have a traumatic response to things. And so when we have childhood trauma, it's very impressionable upon our brains, as we read here from the clinic in Arizona, and it creates this framework that we then can live with for the rest of our lives. I remember I had heard of a 90-year-old man. I was in the room. It was this big group therapy that I was a part of. A 90-year-old man speaking about the childhood trauma that still informed him to this day. And it's that powerful. It's not to be underestimated. It is not to be taken lightly. It is not to be minimized. And I think it's really important for you, as we said in the earlier video, kind of to start to source out where this trauma is informing you. Where is this trauma happening? And start to dig into the stories that you have been carrying with you for some time. Why do you believe these things to be true? Well, what happened that created the framework for now? What exactly is the tools that you're using today that you were given as a kiddo? And how is that affecting you right now? The Google AI answer is, how do we resolve childhood trauma? Childhood trauma can be resolved through therapy, stress reduction, and building healthy relationships, which is all an effect. To go to therapy, you have to be somebody who's willing to go to therapy. To engage in stress reduction, you have to be somebody who even knows knows how to reduce stress. To build healthy relationships, you have to be somebody that has a healthy relationship with yourself. So until you have these things with yourself, it is going to be insanely tough to just, all of a sudden I have these. And I just want to point that out because I just laughed when I saw these Google things pop up. What we're going to talk about, obviously, I believe it's in the title, I'm not sure what I wrote down yet, is 3 ways of navigating childhood trauma. And Google is just like, yeah, just have the cool things. Be healthy. Drink water. And that is it's so on its face, just very simple. It's so easy, and it's not. What we're going to talk about here, I'm going to give you the 3 things to resolving it off the bat, just so we have something to go back to. 1 is be aware. 2 is accepting there may be no resolve. And 3, how does it inform you today? And I think that this is so important because very rarely do we look at past versions of ourselves or imagine ourselves in a room with our younger self and just tell that person, you did a great job. You did the best you could. Wow, look at you now. This is pretty freaking awesome what you've amounted to. You got worlds ahead of you. You're doing great. it's tough to give ourselves grace. We can look at other people and say, oh man, great job. It's easy to do that outside of ourselves, but when it's for us, for some reason, it's this inability. I know that you probably know some people that can give to others. They really know how to show up for others, except for themselves. They know how to show up for everybody except themselves. And they will deplete themselves for the good of everybody else outside of them, but at the same time, they're dying on the inside. And that happens often, very often. You might be doing it right now. And that whole thing of just showing ourselves some love is a lot easier said than done, but it's also, it can become slightly cautious because when we feel that something is easy to do and we're not doing it, there's then some shame and guilt that comes along with it. And I want you to understand that none of this is easy. None of it is. It's simple to say, but it's not easy. And the first thing to understanding what navigating childhood trauma can do for you is that it breaks you from the proverbial chains of the stories that you have learned as a child. You don't always have to people please. You don't always have to say yes to everything just in fear that you'll lose a relationship. You don't have to be perceivably the best in your field, otherwise you won't feel not worthless. I mean, those are real things. Those are real things that people may have active in themselves and not know it. And it's really important to point that out, because if you don't understand that that's happening, then you can't change it. Can't have any transmutation without awareness. And so, number one, that's exactly what we're talking about. Be aware. Dig around. Your childhood is vast. It's probably like this whole library of like encyclopedias and whatnot. You got to get in there. You got to spend some time going in there. It may be painful. It may be uncomfortable, but you have to take a look at it at some point. Now, again, I am not asking you to hold on to these stories. I'm not asking you to speak to these stories. I'm not asking you to engage with any of these past people in your life. All I'm saying is to look at it. Just take a look. You may feel awful. You may feel absolutely pained. You might feel definitely some trauma revisiting it, but find where it is first. Where is the story coming from? Where is the tapes? We used to call them tapes. Because tapes are automatic. They're just rolling. You're not even thinking about it. The tape is just rolling, and you're just like, you're a train on the track, just going about it. You're not really exercising any autonomy or agency in this. You locked in. And so when you start to undo these tapes and you start to take a look at, where are these coming from? Why am I reliving this? Why am I looping? Then you can start to do the work. Then you can get to these Google AI prompts where it says, just be happy. Resolve it through therapy. If therapy is big, we will get into that in a different video, but you have to be a person that wants to go to therapy. And that's actually a big one too that I'll talk about. I think the series is going to be 7 videos, not just 6. Once you face this, you have to face it in whatever feels most tolerable to you. I'm not asking you to, again, engage, speak, or confront it. It's just take a look at it, find where it is first. Once you find where it is, well, then we can start to understand it for what it is. I had to do this several times, and I have a story at the end of this that'll lend to this, because physically it can manifest on a huge level. And once you understand it, face it, take a look at it, or just recognize what the childhood trauma is that has been living rent-free in your life. Number 2, you may have to understand that the resolution may be no resolution. And what I mean by that is you may just have to let it be. It just is what it is. And that is the resolve. You're never going to solve it. It's not going to become any clearer. Maybe somebody died and you don't know how to resolve or make an amends with that person or that situation. You just have to let it be where it is. You have to find your own private way of getting complete with all these things, getting back to one, as we say in film, getting somewhat just to the point where you're at peace with it. That's the big thing. And We're not talking about forgiveness yet, but this is part of the functionality of it. So you're getting to a point where you understand that resolving it may mean you have to let go of your version of resolution. Like you may not have the thing that you came in here to get. That is one thing you have to understand. Whenever you enter into parts of yourself, you have to really, especially when we're dealing with the universe, or we're talking about God, or we're talking about a higher power. They say one way to make God laugh is to tell him about your plans. Tell him how you're gonna get there. And so what we want, we can vision that. How we do it, how it goes down, it may be entirely unlike anything you ever expected. And what you get may not look what you expected. It might be totally different. So you have to accept that you're at least taking the action. You're taking the action, you're taking the steps. That's great. Not a lot of people even get to this part. You're taking the actions and taking the steps, and what you get may not look like anything that you thought you would get. And you have to be at peace with that. It's just acceptance that there may not be the resolve that you thought that you would have. It may be a different type of resolve, and be open to that. So when dealing with childhood trauma, that is the second thing that will possibly help you navigate it. And the other thing I have written down here is that accepting it happened and being very cognizant that it's in the past. Once you can put those two together, it's this thing that our body goes in a fight or flight mode. I think one of the techniques that I heard was taught in a group therapy session was if you look this way, look to your far right, and then you look to your far left, your body will go at ease because it's seeing there's nothing here, that there's no predators out here or any kind of, saber-toothed tigers that are out to get you. The whole point is that your body is like going into this fight or flight mode sometimes. And so when we understand that that story is in the past and it doesn't have to live with us today, we can then start to break the chains of that trauma, or break the chains of the stories that we bonded ourselves to, and start living with a little more autonomy and agency, and really constructing the life that we want going forward, as opposed to this story constructing our lives for us being locked in the track. The third thing is, how has the trauma informed you today? We'll go back to the last video. Why have you been pushing people away? Why have you been suddenly just like cutting ties off, slamming doors, closing windows, maybe breaking windows, I don't know. But when we start to take inventory, how has this trauma informed us today? Great. Now we can see, where it's been at work or at play, and where we're allowing it to direct our lives. Well, then we can take that power back, right? So once you see where it's been taken away, you can then start to take a look at it and say, oh, well, I'm going to take that power back. I'm not going to let that tape live there. You may or may not make the best decisions going forward. That's not the point. The point is you having the autonomy and freedom to be yourself going forward without being tied to these stories or these ideas of what you think your life should be based on what you experienced between the ages of 0 and 4. And I will tell you that there are just so many things and so many youth that I've worked with that even by the time they get to 2nd or 3rd grade, they've had these stories embedded. It is so tough to watch. It's a reality. And as an adult watching this, you clearly have experienced this. I think a lot of us have, and all of us probably, but it's just to what degree are we aware of it? And I had a story in my mind for what this was going to be. Actually, what I'll get to first before I get into the story is the Google response to navigating childhood trauma. Focus on your physical well-being. Embrace your imperfections and release the ones you can't change. Make positive practices your new normal. Take your time and don't rush anything. To begin healing from trauma, it's important to first acknowledge it for what it is. Now I'll actually give that last one, that is A+. Everything else is just an effect of a cause. So once you start acknowledging for what it is, then you can do all the other things. Even those take steps. Oh my goodness, I just hit myself in the face. But the point is that you want to be able to first acknowledge it, then accept it may not look like what you think it's supposed to look like dealing with it. And then lastly, taking a little bit of inventory of your life. Where has this informed me? Where has this really told me or directed me, and I really can exercise some different choices here, because you have the freedom now. You have the power now. It's all back in your hands. I'm trying to think of a story that reflects to all of this. I had one, and then I totally forgot it. But I remember it. This was a few years ago, actually. I had made amends with my father in 2020 and my mother in 2020. And then it wasn't until 2022, I was in New Orleans. I was born in New Orleans, and was raised there until I was 4. My parents split. My mom took my sister and I and drove us here to Minneapolis. And I'd had so many things in New Orleans. Like, we didn't just leave, like, hey, everybody pack your things up. I was 4, so I didn't know what was going on. 2, it was like the early morning. So my mom was like, we're going to the car, we're leaving, like, boom. And we never went back. That was that. I mean, I went back at some points, like as a young adult. I didn't have any resolve at all in New Orleans. And my father and our relationship was, I would say our relationship was entirely destroyed. I don't want to say destroyed. Destroyed's pretty heavy. There was a indelible rift that I don't even know. I would not later on have the tools to process until decades later. At that point, there's an elephant in the room that you have to acknowledge if you're going to grow. And I remember I wrote him a letter. Actually, last year I wrote him a letter, and in 2020 I talked to him. But the letter I wrote him last year was it was a more mature way of what I wanted to say in 2020. And in 2020 we made amends. But in 2022, I was out there and I was on this journey to really reconnect with my dad and with New Orleans and all these things that happened. And really what it boils down to is that all of this stuff, resolving your childhood trauma, it's not really an external thing. You're not going around, all of a sudden you you fix the chain on a swing set and you're like, I'm fixed. No, you do the inner work. And my dad and I, we'd had this just gnarly relationship growing up. And so we're just really in the infancy of being two people in a room at peace. This was tough. But that aside, I had returned to New Orleans, and this wasn't even to do with my father. This was just trauma that I had in New Orleans. My body being in that space, something happened where I was in Atlanta a week before that, stayed in all these Airbnbs. Everything was fine. Slept well, great. Woke up, felt not groggy, was cool. And then I took a flight to New Orleans. The first day, I realized that my Airbnb, I got it wrong, so I had to sleep at a friend's house. So I was over there, and it's like the shotgun. And I was sleeping on the couch. My friends were off in their bedrooms, and one of the bedrooms was immediately in the living room. And so I had gotten back, slept on the couch, and all of a sudden, I'm standing in the doorway, just boxers, no shoes, standing in the doorway, facing the street, the door is wide open, and I'm just facing outward. And I wake up and I'm like, whoa, what? Now, I don't sleepwalk. I don't do this at all. This doesn't ever happen. And my friend who was sleeping in the living room bed was like, hey, Tucson. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, go back to bed. And I was like, what? I look down, I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So I go back to bed. Next day I go to an Airbnb, and I for some reason, I go to bed, it's fine, nothing crazy, nothing different. And I wake up and I'm standing and I'm looking out of a window. Now, I'm sure somebody in the comment section will have a smarter response to this than I will, but my deduction, my theory was, there was so much unresolved everything in New Orleans that I was having this response to being in the weather, being in seeing all the old playgrounds that I used to go to as a kid, all these things from 0 to 4 that I experienced and then were gone. I was having this response to him. And like, there's like, even like little things, like there's like little red trains that kids ride on throughout the park and the playground. I remembered that. And when I saw it, like I had this like visceral response. Like I just felt like, I felt super vulnerable and I had to sit down and like, go through it. That was all real. That was all real. There was no BS about it or fluff about it. That was like a real thing that happened. And I had to sit down and figure out why. I had no information beyond that. I was just like, oh, I guess I need to take a breath after seeing a red train in the plane. It was so odd. And through therapy, through wanting to get to the bottom of it, we got there and we're still getting there. This is a lifelong journey, man. Like you don't just all of a sudden, you have to acknowledge that it's there. And I had to acknowledge that it was there first before I even did any work to get to the place that I am right now. And it's the same thing for you. It's essentially, it's seeing it for what it is, understanding the outcome may not be what you think it is, and then taking inventory of how it's informed you. And for me, I've had to do a lot of that. And I still have a lot of work ahead of me. And that is just one journey of childhood trauma. It could be entirely different for you. It may involve really recognizing it and then not wanting to ever even touch or go back to that situation because it's so painful. I don't know, everybody's journey is different. But that was mine. And that was the first step to healing and then being able to enter into relationships and even be a better artist, be a better friend, be a better partner, be a better musician on stage. Like I was just able to show up for people that I was playing with at different shows and whatnot. So that definitely helped me. And if anybody has any other ways of navigating childhood trauma, put them in the comments below. Seriously, like help some other folks out. And if it's too painful to write down, don't write it down. But that is 3 ways of navigating childhood trauma. One way that I did it. And yeah, sometimes you have to go back to the start. All right, that's all we got for today. Sun's going down. We'll see you in the next video.